Okay. Hi, this is a test run of our videotape tutoring sessions. So let me know what you think of the sound and the picture and if you can hear me projecting while I do my lesson. Okay? So we're going to do cardiovascular flow of the blood through the heart. Okay, take one. So everybody knows that the heart is a muscle, okay? Anytime you see the word cardiac, it always refers to heart. And we know that the heart is a muscle. What is unique about the heart muscle? Well, remember, it is striated, which means it has stripes, similar to a skeletal muscle. And the reason it's striped is because it moves so much. Without our heart beating every minute, we wouldn't be here. But the thing that makes it unique is that most skeletal muscle that is striated is voluntary. We choose to move our skeletal muscle, just like as I'm talking to you. My hands are moving, my voice is moving. These are all muscles that are controlled by us. What's interesting about cardiac muscle is that it is involuntary, meaning that we do not tell our brain, go ahead and tell the heart to pump, 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 because that's all we'd ever do. We'd never get anything done. So the muscle is involuntary, it's controlled by the brain, and it's striated. So that's what's making cardiac muscle unique from any other muscle in the body. All right, so we know that the heart sits towards the middle of the chest. It is slightly tilted to the left side, with the base of the heart being the top and the apex of the heart, or the point, being towards the bottom. Okay, but our heart is divided into sections. Okay. And for our purposes, I'm going to demonstrate the heart as the shape of a heart that you know. Okay. All right. So the heart is divided into 4 sections. Okay. We call these sections chambers. Okay, so we have 4 chambers. And in those chambers, there are 4 valves that assist the blood flow passing from one side of the heart to the other. Okay, the heart is known as a 2-loop system. Okay, one is the pulmonary loop, and the other is the cardiac loop. Now, while these 2 loops work together in sort of a figure-8 pattern, the 2 loops never connect. Okay, so the pulmonary loop never sends blood into the cardiac loop. Okay, it has to finish its cycle. Now, like I said, it's a figure-8. So this is loop 1. And this is loop 2. Okay? Again, they both go in and out of the heart, but they never mix. Okay? And the reason they don't mix is because of this wall right here. Okay? This wall is called the septum. So what that means is blood that is unoxygenated comes in on the right side, cannot cross over into the left side. It's impossible, because the right side eventually is going to go to the lungs. The left side comes back from the lungs. So the blood in these areas will never ever mix with the blood in those areas. Okay? Now it's important to remember when we're talking about right and left side of the heart, okay, if I'm looking at it standing this way, this is my right and this is my left. But when we're talking about the heart, you have to remember that we're talking about the anatomical position. Okay, so this is now my right, this is my left. So when I'm describing it, I'm thinking about it from me, from my perspective looking out. I'm not talking about it from your perspective looking at me. Okay, it's backwards. So we always want to think about this in the anatomical position. Okay, so where does the blood come from? Well, honestly, because these two loops are running at all times, you really can start either side. Okay, but let's start with the unoxygenated blood that needs to come back in for more oxygen. And why does the blood need to carry oxygen to the rest of the body? Well, because our muscles need oxygen to live, as well as our organs. So without the oxygen, we're not going to survive. All right, so let me just erase this. And this. Okay, so we are going to start with loop 1, which we said was the pulmonary loop. Now, anything that has to do with the word pulmonary always refers to the lung. Okay, anything that refers to cardiac always refers to the heart or the cardiovascular system. So the pulmonary loop, which is the first loop, also contains the lungs, hence pulmonary. Now, most people think that the blood gets reoxygenated in the heart muscle. It doesn't. Okay, that's why it's called pulmonary loop, because it actually gets reoxygenated in the lung, not in the heart. Okay, very important to remember that. So what brings the deoxygenated blood back for more oxygen? Well, we're always going to start on the right side. Remember, that's your right. So if you're right-handed, remember it's your dominant side. What brings the blood back in? Well, it comes from two places. And again, don't mind my drawing, please. I know it's bad. So it comes from the superior and the inferior vena cava. Okay, the vena cava is basically the largest vein in the entire body. Okay, so here's the superior side, here's the inferior side. Okay, this comes from behind and up and into, and this comes from above. So the blood that's deoxygenated is coming in through the superior vena cava from the head, the neck. All the rest is coming up and from your extremities and your trunk into the inferior vena cava, but they both empty in this first chamber. Now this chamber is called the right atrium or atria. You might hear it both ways. So both the superior and the inferior vena cava empty into the upper right atrium chamber of the heart. Now there's no pressure here, because it's kind of like pouring Kool-Aid into a glass, okay? It's dumping the deoxygenated blood in, and this is starting to fill up, okay? When it fills up, it needs somewhere to go because it has to get to the right and left lung. So if it's filling up here, there's nowhere for it to go to the lung here. So we need a little door, okay? So you have a little trap door here called a valve. Okay, remember, we said there were 4 chambers and 4 valves. Okay, very important to know for your NBLEX exam. So this is the first valve. Okay, so the first valve in loop 1, which again we said was the pulmonary loop going to the lungs, is called the tricuspid valve. Okay, and why is it called the tricuspid valve? Well, because it has 3 flaps that open and close. Okay, so this is tricuspid valve. Now what happens is the brain gets a signal that the right atrium is full. It opens the trap door and allows that deoxygenated blood to fill up this chamber right here. Okay, so our next chamber is on the same side that we started with. So this would be called the right ventricle. Okay, right ventricle. Now the right ventricle is a little different than the right atrium as far as function and thickness. Okay, the wall of the right ventricle is going to be thicker than the wall of the right atrium. Okay, and this is muscle we're talking about, strictly muscle here. So the reason that the heart wall is thicker in the right ventricle than in the right atrium is due to pressure. Okay, remember we said that we don't need any pressure in the right atrium because the blood is just pouring in nice and neat. Once the blood starts to come down into the right ventricle, it starts to fill up. The tricuspid valve now slams shut. Okay, boom. It's like a bouncer at a club. You know, you can get out, but you can't get back in. So now this wall is closed. So all the blood that was in the right atria is now in the right ventricle. While this is getting ready to move, the right atria is filling up again. So it's a constant cycle. All right, so where does all the blood in the right ventricle go? Well, remember we said because of the septum, it can't cross over here. It has to get to the lung to get reoxygenated. So it's going to go through another valve. Okay, the other valve is here. Let's draw it this way. Okay, this valve is known as the pulmonary semilunar valve. Now, even though I'm writing it on the left side, don't get confused. It's still going from the right ventricle into each of these lungs. Okay. So the second valve in the pulmonary loop is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay, so we've done 2 chambers and 2 valves. So the blood from this right side has to get pumped. Okay, here's where your force comes in. Here there's no pressure. Here we need a lot of pressure because we have to push into these 2 lungs. Now, the way I'm drawing the diagram, if you think about it, the lungs are behind the heart. So there's veins and arteries that are bringing this ventricle into both right and left lungs. Otherwise, you get confused and think it's just the left lung, but it goes to both. So if you look up on YouTube or look up on Google a 3D picture of the heart and the lungs, you'll see how that's forward so that it can get to both. Okay, so it goes into the lungs and the lungs add oxygen to it through the pulmonary capillaries and reoxygenate the blood. That's the end of loop 1. That's where it stops. This is the whole pulmonary loop. It goes from the superior and inferior vena cava. It has no oxygen or hardly any oxygen left. It fills up your right atrium. Okay, when it's full, the tricuspid valve opens, allows that blood to flow into the right ventricle. The tricuspid closes, lets the atrium fill up again. While that's filling up, the right ventricle is shooting the blood through a contraction, muscle contraction, into each lung where it gets reoxygenated. End of loop 1. Okay? If you get confused, go back, listen to this again. All right. So again, 2 valves, 2 chambers of the heart. Okay? Totally independent from each other. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. I just want to erase this so you don't get confused. Okay. All right. Now, we've gone to the lung and we're reoxygenated. So while we are thinking about bringing that blood back into the heart to deliver to the body, the right side here is still doing its thing. It's doing loop 1. Loop 2 is the blood comes back in to the left atrium or atria. Okay? So now we're reoxygenated. Okay, we have nice, fresh, rich oxygen that's ready to be going to the whole body. So once again, because of this septum right here, this thick heart muscle wall, the right side blood cannot get into the left side, and the left side can now not cross into the right side again. So we're coming back in with some nice, rich blood, right? We're filling up. And again, what did we say about the atrias? No pressure. It's just pouring in from these pulmonary veins. Okay? This will be the only time oxygenated blood runs through a vein. Because remember, this is the pulmonary side, not cardiac. So the oxygenation is happening in the lung. All right, so our fresh, rich blood is filling up. Okay, while that's filling up, this cycle is still going on. Right, so you have your unoxygenated or deoxygenated blood getting ready to go to the lung and become oxygenated. But this is not going to go to where it needs to go. It's just filling up the left atria, right? Left. So we need another little trap door here, okay? To get this blood to pour down into the ventricle, okay? This trap door, I forgot to erase that, sorry. Okay, so for loop 2, which is the cardiac loop, the first valve is called the bicuspid because it only has 2 flaps, or this is also known as the mitral valve. Okay, in the medical world, you'll hear it referred to as the mitral valve, probably more frequently than the bicuspid. Okay, so the way I tell all the students to learn the valves is you have your tricuspid here on the right side, you have your bicuspid on the left side. So the way I remember that is I have to try before I buy. Right? I want to try something before I buy it. So try before you buy. So if you're always starting with loop 1 on the right side, you're always going to try before you buy. That's the way I remember that. All right. So what did we say about the right ventricle? The muscle wall is thicker, correct? So it's the same here, okay? And this wall is actually a little bit thicker than the right side. And that's because it has a lot further to go than the lungs. Okay, so it needs to be really strong and powerful, like the great Oz. Okay, so we went through our bicuspid mitral valve. We are now filling up the left ventricle with nice blood. But where's it going? Where does the blood from the left ventricle go? It goes to our body. How does it go to the body? by the main artery, because remember, arteries take blood away from the heart. Vena cava brings deoxygenated blood to the heart. Artery takes fresh blood away from the heart. So, the aorta, which is your main artery, will come out from the heart, right, and go two places. It goes down into the body, and the aortic arch, which is this big loop right here, that goes to the head and neck. Okay, hopefully you can read that and I'm not writing too sloppy. Okay, that's the head and neck. So from the ventricle, we need what? Another valve, right? Just like the pulmonary semilunar valve, we need another valve here. So the second valve is the aortic semilunar valve. And it tells you where it goes. The pulmonary valve goes to the lungs, the aortic valve goes to the aorta. Now, in medical journals and outside in the real world, you might not see semilunar valve, you might just see aortic, you might see aortic semilunar. So I want you to be familiar with both terms because they're interchangeable, okay? All right, so we have to get up into this valve, this big aorta. So we need another valve, okay? And again, on a real heart diagram, you'll see this much better. You know my drawing's terrible. So from the left ventricle, the blood gets a big push, right? Contraction right here. The blood shoots up through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta. Okay, so now all that fresh blood is coming through here and it's taking a ride. And then it's coming all the way down into the rest of the body, into the smaller arteries. That is loop 2. Okay, that's it. It's only on the left side of the heart. It cannot cross back to the right. It has to go through the whole body to get all the oxygen out and then come back and start again as deoxygenated blood. All right, so right side is loop 1. That's the pulmonary side. That's the deoxygenated blood or oxygen poor blood. The left side is bringing blood back from the lungs that has now been oxygenated at the capillary level. Now, what makes these ventricles contract, right? Because we said it's a muscle contraction, but a muscle contraction needs a stimulus or something that makes it move. So if you remember in your muscle chapter, we talked about action potential, right? We need a spark or friction or something that causes that contraction, just like I'm demonstrating with my hands, right? Contract the muscle. So what makes these muscles contract in order to send it to the lungs or send it to the outside of the body? Well, those are your pacemaker cells. Remember those? Okay, so I'm going to just erase our blood flow here for a second. Okay. Sorry. So we still have the 4 chambers doing their thing, sending the blood where it needs to go, but something has to tell the heart to do all that. Now remember, we said the heart is involuntary because we don't have time to tell it what to do. So what the body has done is given it its own powerhouse, own electrical system. That electrical system is known as the pacemaker cells. Okay, and for those of you who know anybody who has a pacemaker, you know that it regulates heartbeat. Okay, so you have your pacemaker nodes, they're called. So basically that's the electrical stimulus that gets these 2 ventricles pumping. Now we know that they don't all pump at the same time, right? So the 2 atria pump at the same time, which is very weak because they don't need a lot of pressure, the two ventricles pump at the same time. So that's where you get that lub-dub sound from the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves opening and closing. Lub-dub, 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 lub-dub. Yeah. Okay, so what makes these muscles push the blood up and out? In your right atria, you have an electrode. Okay, this electrode is connected to another electrode that's close to that tricuspid valve. Okay, this one is called the SA node. Okay, and SA stands for sinoatrial node. Okay, because it's located almost at the top of the atrium. This node down here is called the AV node. And the way I remember the order is SAVE, right? S-A-V-E would normally be save, the word save, but it's S-A-A-V, save. This one is the atrioventricular node. Okay? So SA node, AV node. So basically this is kind of like when you turn on a light switch and the lights go on, you need that little electricity to send it through. Okay, so this node gets stimulated by the brain. It sends out an electric current to the AV node. So this is like the president, and this is like the vice president. Okay, this AV node will not function until the SA node triggers it. So it won't go back the other way. It has to start that way. Then you have an area called the bundle of His. Okay, and that just means that these two nodes have now split into two. Okay, the bundle of His. From the bundle of His, the rest of the electrical current or wiring goes out to the rest of the heart wall. Okay, and it goes to these ventricles. These are called Purkinje fibers. Okay, so think about how your computer works. You know, you hit run or you hit enter and then you get a reaction. I like to think about this as lightning. When lightning strikes the ground, right? It hits the ground and then it spreads out along the ground. Same thing. And there is a slight reaction time between the two nodes. So this will strike first, then this will strike, and then you get the burst. Kind of like fireworks, right? You hear the initial pshoo, then you wait a few seconds, and then you see the spray. Same thing upside down. Okay, so sinoatrial node stimulates the atrioventricular node. It runs down the bundle of His, and then the rest of the Purkinje fibers light up, causing those two muscles to contract and push the blood up and out of where they need to be. Okay, so if there's a problem in the electrical system, that's why people get either a pacemaker or another electrical device to keep this regulated. Because if this doesn't work, you don't work. You're gone. All right, so hopefully that was a good lesson for you and you understand it. If you don't understand it, please come find us. We'll be happy to help you with this. Again, watch it over again if you need to. You know, I'm going to tell you, make your note cards, write down the steps. That's what's going to help you learn. So right side of the heart, deoxygenated blood. Left side of the heart, oxygenated blood. And they never cross, ever. Loop 1, pulmonary loop. Blood comes in through the right atria, down to the right ventricle, through the tricuspid, out to the lungs. That's it. Loop 2, back from the lungs, left atria, go through the mitral bicuspid valve to the left ventricle, past the aortic semilunar valve, up to the aorta, out to the body. All right, let me know how you liked our video. Thanks so much. Bye.